Live from Mohawk Valley Community College, this is the 22nd Congressional District Debate on your local election headquarters.
Good evening. My name is Randy Van Wagner, and I'm the president of Mohawk Valley Community College. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's debate here in the Mohawk Valley Community College's Michael Schaefer Theater. Tonight's debate is between the two leading candidates in the race for New York's 22nd congressional seat. We've never experienced a year like 2020, a worldwide pandemic, a summer of protest and unrest, not just in our country, but around the world. And 2020 is an election year. Americans will decide who will be our president and who will sit in the House of Representatives. And that is why we are here tonight. New York's 22nd district race has drawn national attention. And with our nation at a critical juncture, House races have become all the more important. MVCC is more than just an institute of higher learning. We are a vital part of the overall quality of health, the quality of life, and the overall health for this community. We are proud to once again partner with the Nexstar Media Group stations in our community, WUTR, WBGH, and WSYR, to provide this public service in the form of tonight's debate. Now I would like to introduce the moderator for tonight's debate, Mike Hoey.
Dr. Van Wagner, thank you very much for your warm introduction and also for your continued partnership. We're grateful to have it. And good evening, everyone. I am Mike Hoey, and I am serving as the moderator for tonight's debate between the leading candidates in New York's 22nd Congressional District. Now, needless to say, the logistical dynamics of this race are unprecedented. Thanks to both absentee mail-in balloting and early voting in person, some of you, no doubt, have voted already. Many of you still waiting to cast your vote nonetheless. Whichever of those categories you happen to be in, we're thankful that you've taken some time out of your evening to be with us for this very important part of our nation's electoral process. Now, these two candidates that you're going to see, Democratic nominee Anthony Brindisi and Republican nominee Claudia Tenney, will be taking questions from a panel of 3 journalists, each of whom represents a different portion of New York's 22nd Congressional District. Now, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each question and will then have 30 seconds to respond to their opponent's answer. And at the end of the debate, each candidate will also be given 2 minutes to make a closing statement about whatever they wish. Well, and out of consideration to MVCC's commitment to safe practices, we should note that the Michael Schaefer Theater here at Mohawk Valley Community College does not have a studio audience tonight. On stage, as you may have noticed, a distance of 6 feet has been employed between all of the participants in compliance with accepted, safe social distancing standards. Well, as we noted a few moments ago in the introduction, the candidates are going to be taking questions posed by a panel of 3 journalists representing various regions of New York's 22nd Congressional District. Let's introduce our panel for the evening to you right now. First, Thomas Fleming, the anchor and producer. My apologies. We'll get to the introduction of the panelists momentarily. We will do that and kick off the debate in just a moment.
Live from Mohawk Valley Community College, this is the 22nd Congressional District Debate on your local election headquarters.
Welcome back, and I apologize about jumping the gun about the introduction of your panelists for the evening. Now it is time to do that, so let's take a moment to introduce them to you, journalists from different portions of the 22nd Congressional District. First, Thomas Fleming, the anchor and producer of Eyewitness News on WUTR and WFXV right here in Utica. Next to him, on his left, Jim Emke, the news director and anchor at WBGH and WIVT News Channel 34 in Binghamton. To his left, Dan Cummings, a news anchor and host of Newsmakers with Dan Cummings on WSYR News Channel 9 in Syracuse. Now that you've met the panelists, we now need to meet the candidates for tonight's debate. First, Anthony Brindisi. He attended this institution, Mohawk Valley Community College, and then earned a bachelor's degree from Siena College. He earned a law degree from the Albany Law School. He served in the New York State Assembly from 2011 until 2018. In 2018, Mr. Brindisi was elected to the House of Representatives in New York's 22nd District. In his time on Capitol Hill, he served on the House Armed Services Committee, the Agriculture Committee, and the Veterans Affairs Committee. This is his first campaign for re-election. And Claudia Tenney. She is a graduate of Colgate University and earned her law degree from the Cincinnati College of Law. She also served in the New York State Assembly. Her time in office in Albany spanned from 2011 until 2016, when Ms. Tenney won a three-way race to fill what was then an open seat in New York's 22nd District, becoming, in the process, the first woman to ever represent our area in Congress. She lost a close race for re-election to Mr. Brindisi 2 years ago. This is her third campaign for Congress. All right, now, before we began the debate, there was a coin toss so that we could determine the order that the candidates will answer their questions. Now, Mr. Brindisi won the toss, and he has elected to be the last candidate to give a closing statement this evening. Consequently, Ms. Tenney has chosen to be the last candidate to answer the first question. Now, that first question, let's begin with Thomas Fleming.
Mr. Brindisi, the Payment Protection Program ended with roughly $130 billion left in unused funds, yet many of our small businesses across central New York struggle to get sufficient funding. What would you do moving forward to bring aid to those small businesses still struggling to keep their doors open?
Well, thank you, Thomas, and that's a good question. Small businesses have really seen the brunt of this pandemic, and I was very happy that Congress was able to come together and pass a number of bipartisan coronavirus response bills. In fact, we were able to deliver about $750 million in aid, PPP aid to businesses here in this district, saving about 86,000 jobs. After the first round of PPP came out and I started to hear from small businesses about money not coming back to New York State, in the second round I fought for set-asides in the PPP loan program to make sure that money was going to community banks, credit unions, institutions that lend to minority-owned businesses, to make sure that aid was going to those businesses that need the most help. We saved a lot of jobs through that PPP program. What we need to do now is replenish that PPP program and do another round of stimulus for businesses and individuals across the 22nd District and across the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Now, Ms. Tenney, your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. As a small business owner in this community, our business was founded 74 years ago, right in the heart of central New York, and we've been struggling through this terrible pandemic like so many others. And our biggest concern now is that we have a political situation going on where we are not getting the needed relief. We're still in a shutdown mode, and we are not able to get the relief, nor are any of the other businesses, and we're seeing the tragedy of so many small businesses closing right here, while Nancy Pelosi refuses to bring another bill to the floor until after the election. And many businesses, sadly, are not going to be able to survive. But what's in the bill, and Mr. Brindisi co-sponsored and supported, was things that have nothing to do with COVID response. For example, releasing dangerous criminals into our communities, abolishing voter ID, giving backdated stimulus checks to illegal immigrants, prioritizing them over our small business community. These people are hurting and they're struggling. We need to have a bill come to the floor now. We can't really wait anymore for this politicizing of this by Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. I apologize, but we do need to move on. Our next question comes from Jim Emke.
Rebut that?
Oh, yeah, I apologize.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. You do have 30 seconds of rebuttal, beginning, Mr. Brindisi, with you.
Well, what my opponent said is simply not true. In fact, I just voted against the most recent HEROES bill in order to try and bring something bipartisan to the floor. I'm not going to engage in finger-pointing. The fact of the matter is we need to get another COVID-19 relief bill passed. That's why I came together with a bipartisan group in the House, the Problem Solvers Caucus, to really get talks going again, to get leaders in the White House, in the House. Unfortunately, the Senate's been a little absent from those discussions, back together so we can pass another COVID relief bill. It's going to take Democrats and Republicans coming together. That's something I have a proven track record of doing.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Now, Ms. Tenney, a 30-second rebuttal opportunity for you also.
I think I get to rebut that right as well, right?
You do. You have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity also.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, you know, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing you'll see in this debate, just like the millions of ads you're seeing on TV pointing fingers at me, calling me all kinds of things that I'm not, and you all know that. But the fact is that he can put out all the bipartisan bills he wants. None of them are going to get past Nancy Pelosi. It's why he has a record of voting 90% of the time with Nancy Pelosi. He's not bipartisan, nor is he moderate. He is far left, and even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez votes more with our president than Anthony Brindisi.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Now for our second question. My apologies once again, candidates. This one coming to you from Jim Emke.
Okay, Ms. Tenney, many of your campaign events out on the trail have doubled as Back the Blue rallies. And why have you made support of law enforcement so central to your campaign?
Thank you. Actually, we haven't really hosted any of those other than one. These are independent groups, grassroots, that have formed, and we have attended them in support of Backing the Blue. Look at in our communities right now, we're seeing looting and violence across this nation. Thankfully, not terribly in this region, but people are concerned and scared as I go around the country, around the district. They're very worried about their security and their safety. I back our police because my opponent actually voted to defund the police. Now, you're going to hear him talk about how he didn't do that, but he actually voted to defund them, and he's trying to run cover now by putting in a bill, another bill that's not going to pass the House because Nancy and AOC are never going to let it out. But our police officers deserve the respect. Mr. Brindisi has voted not only to defund, he's voted to expose them to liability, and it was in direct response to him receiving something like $10,000 or more from trial lawyer groups looking to sue police officers. So we voted to eliminate qualified immunity, which make it much easier to find them liable, where they could be put in jeopardy for losing their homes or their cars.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Now, Mr. Brindisi, your 1 minute response, please.
Well, supporting our law enforcement is very important to me as well. During my time in the state legislature, I've been able to pass legislation and actually secure dollars to bring back towards law enforcement here in the district. As a member of Congress, I have stood up to people on the far left who want to defund the police. My opponent says it's some kind of a gimmick, but I have co-sponsors right here in New York, like Congresswoman Stefanik, Congressman Reed, two Republican co-sponsors of my legislation, to actually prevent cities from defunding the police department. We need to be investing in law enforcement. Yes, we have to make sure police are accountable. We all feel that the situation with George Floyd should never happen to anyone. We need accountability. But what we also have to do is we have to invest in things like mental health. I've actually called for a doubling of the COPS Department of Justice grant, which would bring more community engagement programs to our police.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Now, candidates, you each have 30 seconds of rebuttal. Ms. Tenney, you have yours.
Thank you. He's never going to get away from the fact that he voted for a bill that would defund the police, take away their qualified immunity, and allow actual doxing, meaning criticizing police before there's due process. That's the reason that I have the endorsement of the New York State Troopers, 187 police benevolent associations, numerous sheriffs across the nation, or across the state and in this district. That's why they support me. They know I back them. I support them. I have yet to see Anthony Brindisi at any of the bipartisan Back the Blue rallies. I do so by showing up and being there for them. They know I have their back. That's why they're endorsing me.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Mr. Brindisi, rebuttal for you also, 30 seconds.
Well, my opponent believes that if she tells a lie enough, people will actually start believing it. The fact of the matter is independent media sources have discredited her claim that I voted to defund the police. The fact is I've actually introduced legislation supporting law enforcement by going after cities that choose to defund the police and calling for a doubling of the COPS grant to allow police departments to hire more officers to do community engagement programs. We have to invest in mental health. We have to make sure we have well-funded police departments so they can get into the community and build that trust.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Now, candidates, it's time for your third question of the evening, this one coming from Dan Cummings.
Mr. Brindisi, speaking of the coronavirus itself, the spread of COVID-19, the disease, the epidemiology of this illness, what's the most important lesson that the White House should have learned from the pandemic?
Well, I would say millions of people have been affected by this coronavirus. I've talked to individuals, families across this district, and my heart goes out to everyone who's been impacted by this awful pandemic. What we need to have at the national levels, we have to have a national testing strategy to try and make sure that we get this virus under control. Then we can safely reopen our economy and move on with our lives. Another lesson that we have to take away from this is that we have to start making things in this country again. In the early days of this pandemic, a company here in Utica called HPK Industries reached out to me. They make medical supplies, and they wanted to be able to supply the state of New York. And ultimately, what I was able to do was connect them with the state. The state started purchasing medical gowns and face masks and other PPE from them so they could get it to healthcare workers across the state. We need to do more of that, and that's why I've introduced bipartisan legislation, the Made in America Emergency Preparedness Act, to make sure that our Department of Defense and other federal agencies are purchasing from U.S. manufacturers.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Now, Ms. Tenney, your 1 minute response, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think one of the things the White House probably should have done is had more guidance to and taken more control over what the states did. The president came out immediately, assigned the vice president in charge of the task force. The vice president came out with a comprehensive plan that was given to all the states. We all have seen it, gone through the phases. The president cut off travel to China. My opponent voted against that. He voted for a bill that would ban travel, meaning that people from China would not be prohibited from coming into this community, into the United States, and spreading this virus. In March, I penned an article in the Post-Standard, the Syracuse Post-Standard, talking about how we had to resource our many of these drugs and life-saving cures here in the United States. While he's busy attacking some of the drug companies, we need to support the ones that are doing a good job in finding therapeutics and life-saving cures. But I think one thing we could do better on this time around is make sure that we allow our small business communities to thrive while we protect people who are the most vulnerable instead of protecting
everyone. Thank you, Ms.
everyone.
Tenney. And now, candidates, you each have 30 seconds of rebuttal. Mr. Brindisi, beginning with you.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear my opponent defend the drug companies. She's taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from the drug manufacturers, and when she was in office, voted to give them a $50 billion tax cut. The fact is, she talks a lot about China, but when she was a member of Congress, she actually did nothing about it. She has 0 standalone bills signed into law as a member of Congress. I've had 6 signed into law by this president. I've actually held China accountable by passing legislation to crack down on illegal fentanyl and put sanctions on Chinese drug manufacturers. So I have a track record of actually getting tough with China. My opponent just talks about it.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Ms. Tenney, your 30-second rebuttal, please.
Thank you. This is like a broken record. I had over 300 bills passed in the House of Representatives, 21 signed into law by President Trump, and numerous bills that actually helped and did something about China. I support President Trump, who's been the most tough on China than any president in my lifetime. He's voted to impeach him. That's not going to help us as we go forward. We need to deal with these issues, especially dealing with the COVID virus. Right now, our businesses are struggling. He's politicized this by supporting Nancy Pelosi. These bills need to come out. It's dire straits for our business community right now. It's a tragedy that he does nothing but wait for Nancy Pelosi's cue.
Candidates, thank you both for bearing with us through the first round of questioning. We will continue the questioning for Mr. Brindisi and Ms. Tenney after this brief break.
Live from Mohawk Valley Community College, this is the 22nd Congressional District Debate on your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to our 22nd District Congressional Debate. We will pick things back up now, candidates, with a second round of questioning. Ms. Tenney, the first response to this one will come from you, and the question will come to you from Thomas Fleming.
Ms. Tenney, a high number of young voters are expected in this coming election, particularly those under the age of 25. Why do you deserve their vote over your opponent, and what issues do you feel affect that particular demographic that you can address better than your opponent?
Thank you. Well, I have a son who's 29 years old, and he's under 30. And I think one of the things that really distinguishes me from my opponent is how independent I am. I'm the only one in this race who's almost always had a primary. My opponent has never had a primary, which means he's always been handpicked and beholden to the powerful interests in his party. He's always had a gilded path. He's never had to fight to get votes on both sides and really, truly be independent. I also want to fight for our young people to have a chance to experience the American dream and to have the opportunity to be entrepreneurs. What my opponent proposes is something like socialism, and I think a lot of people don't understand exactly what that is, a lot of young people, but that means government would control your life and you wouldn't be able to be independent. And I think what I'm seeing with a lot of young people, they tend to be more of libertarian-like or really more like Republicans as time goes on because they realize government isn't always the answer. And so I think that we offer a lot of hope and inspiration. I think on the other side you see so much of this, just...
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Apologies, candidates. Mr. Brindisi, you have a 1-minute response, please.
Well, the reason she's always had primaries is because so many Republicans don't even support her. The fact is that I feel that young voters I don't deserve their vote. I have to earn their vote. And that's why you have to show up and you have to listen to young people. You have to show up and listen to older adults and every voting demographic. I've been doing town halls all throughout my time as a member of Congress, showing up in every part of this district, listening to issues. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, I've met with many students across this district and held town hall meetings with the various colleges and universities. They want us focusing on issues. They want us solving problems. I have a record of solving problems and bringing people together. In divided government, getting 6 bills signed into law by the president is not an easy thing to do, but it's something I've been able to accomplish because I've worked with both sides. I listen to the voters. I actually get things done. When it comes to issues like climate change, when it comes to issues like tackling student loan debt, when it comes to the other issues that are important to young people, I've showed up, I've listened, I've gotten things done. My opponent never has showed up to listen to the young people or anyone in this district.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Candidates, you do now have each 30 seconds of rebuttal. And Ms. Tenney, may we have yours, please?
Yeah, you're going to hear over and over, I don't show up, or he shows up and he gets things done. What does that really mean? Like showing up? This is one of the big lies of his campaign of 18 and now of 20. When we talk to young voters, I met with young voters at every college. We have 11 colleges in this community. I've met with them throughout the district. I've done 11 town halls. I've done hundreds of public events, not to mention coffees and roundtables with seniors, with students, with people struggling with opioid addiction. I've done a lot of those things to meet with and talk to young people. So you're going to hear this get things done over and over, but yet he really hasn't gotten anything done on climate change other than to just, vote many times in the state assembly to ban responsible gas drilling in this state. Probably he would vote for it in this country as well. He teamed up with Governor Cuomo and supported those things, and I don't see anything that he's doing that's really helping young people. I know a lot of young people have come to me and said that he was going to do something about their student debt, but he refuses to meet with people who are young and interested in those issues because they're Republicans, and he will not meet with them.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Mr. Brindisi, you have 30 seconds of rebuttal.
Well, the facts are, and media has checked this, my opponent did one town hall meeting when she was a member of Congress, and you had to be invited to it. She never met with her constituents. She spent more time in Washington than she did back here in the district. I've held town halls on just about every college campus in this district. When it comes to the issue of student loan debt, I've actually voted for more Pell Grants to go towards students to make college more affordable. My opponent, when she was a member of Congress, voted to reduce Pell Grants for young people. When it comes to climate change, I actually support us getting back into the Paris Climate Accord. My opponent has taken $150,000 from the oil and gas industry and voted to roll back regulations on clean air and clean water that we depend on here in upstate New York. It's about getting things done. I have a track record of doing it. You can check the facts. I've had 6 bills signed into law. My opponent has had 0. She says she's had bills signed into law, but the fact is, go to govtrack.org. You can check yourself and find out she's had 0 legislation signed into law.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Speaking of you, Mr. Brindisi, you will offer the first response to our next question, which is from Jim Emke.
Mr. Brindisi, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a spotlight on the need for reliable broadband internet service, especially due to all of the virtual meetings and virtual instruction that's taking place these days. What steps will you take to increase access to broadband internet if you're elected?
Thanks, Jim. You're right. The broadband right now in all of our country is a necessity. It's not a luxury anymore, and I've heard from many families across this district about their struggles, parents working from home. My wife and I have 2 children who are doing distance learning, so hearing from parents about their challenges, trying to educate young people during this pandemic. What we have to make sure the FCC has better maps of our rural areas so we actually know when federal dollars are spent that it's going to the right place. I've actually initiated a mapping survey in this district, which we can now pinpoint what the speeds are in the various parts of this district. I voted for an infrastructure package. I'm part of the Rural Broadband Task Force in the House and voted for an infrastructure package which makes significant investment into rural broadband across our country. And I'm holding big cable companies accountable like Spectrum, going after them, calling on them to make sure that they are providing the services that we
Ms.
deserve.
Tenney, your 1-minute response, please.
Thank you. We're about halfway through this debate, and you have heard my opponent repeatedly say that I'm a liar, I haven't gotten bills passed, and let's just move away from that and start talking about actual accomplishments. I actually did vote to increase Pell Grants for students. I voted also to bring millions and millions of dollars in broadband to our communities through infrastructure. My opponent keeps talking about, I sponsored this bill and I sponsored that bill, but he actually hasn't gotten most of those initiatives passed because he can't get over Nancy Pelosi and the far left in the House, whom he votes with 90% of the time. So when it comes to actual deeds and getting things done, I have done that actually in the House, and we brought record resources to this community when I served in Congress. And when he talks about Spectrum, when you hear about the couple of big lies, one of them is that I didn't do town halls. The second big one is Spectrum. Anthony Brindisi went to Congress promising to hold Spectrum accountable, and you've seen it. He actually took almost $400,000 from dark money super PACs backed by Spectrum. And what's happened to our rates? I look at you, the viewers. They've gone up 6 or 7 times.
Tenney. I apologize, but we do need to move to your 30-second rebuttals. Mr. Brindisi, beginning with you, please.
Well, as someone who's been the biggest thorn in the side of Spectrum Cable, I highly doubt anyone in this district believes that they've given me money. The fact is, if you go to the Federal Election Commission website, you will see that Spectrum has given one person on this stage campaign contributions, and that's my opponent. They gave it to her because she voted them a $9 billion tax cut. They gave it to her because she voted for a bill to allow internet service providers to sell your personal information. They gave it to her because she did everything they wanted her to do and stayed quiet while they were raising their rates. I stand up to Spectrum. I'm going after them both legislatively and against the FCC too.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Ms. Tenney, your 30-second rebuttal also, please.
Again, the lie of Spectrum is I have not taken any money from Spectrum this cycle. Anthony Brindisi has taken almost $400,000 from Spectrum, and our rates are going up. As I said, he has done nothing. He's staged a lot of events. He's panicked. He spent millions of dollars doing 10 or 15 commercials, all on Spectrum Cable. And he lied to you, the voters, because he said, when I go to Congress, I'll fix Spectrum. You cannot fix Spectrum in Congress. He needs to get on the phone and call his friend, Governor Cuomo, who is the person who sided up with Anthony Brindisi to create a monopoly so that we have Spectrum Cable rates out of control.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. We will, however, stay right with you because you'll have the first response to offer to this following question from Dan Cummings.
Thank you, Mike. Ms. Tenney, President Trump supports your election. He wants you back in the House of Representatives. You support President Trump's re-election. You'd like to see him have another 4 years in the White House. I'd like you to take 60 seconds and answer, though, this very specific question, please. When it comes to his handling of the pandemic, is there anything this president has said or done that gives you second thoughts about endorsing him for another term?
Absolutely not. I'm 100% behind President Trump. He's been tremendous to work with. He's done more for this country. He's independent like I am. He stood up for our American values. He did everything he needed to do in the pandemic, particularly when it comes to a New York representative. When President Trump was asked by Andrew Cuomo to come to the rescue, he brought the U.S. Comfort Ship in record time. They created a makeshift hospital because we were concerned about overcapacity out of the Javits Center. He brought ventilators in because we thought that was a solution for them. He cut off travel to China because the Chinese immigration was bringing a lot of the pandemic here, just like they did in Italy, where they have hundreds of thousands of Chinese nationals who actually started off the pandemic there as well. The president did everything he could. I think that the one thing he might have wanted to do is maybe take a little bit more control over people like Andrew Cuomo and deal directly with the nursing home issue, something my opponent has refused to do. But I called for, and I'm still waiting and trying to get a Medicaid.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney.
Sorry.
I apologize, but we do need to continue. Mr. Brindisi, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, I think it's important for any elected representative to make sure that they can work with an administration, Democrat or Republican, when it helps move this country forward, helps this community, but also be independent and be willing to stand up against an administration, Democrat or Republican, when they're doing something to harm this community or this country. I have a proven track record of being independent, actually getting things done and working with this administration. 2 areas where I think they were very deficient during the response to coronavirus. One is around a national testing strategy. We're still not doing enough tests every day. We want to make sure that we get this virus under control and that we can actually get our businesses reopened and move on with our lives. Secondly, in the early days of this pandemic, the distribution of PPE and medical supplies was not what it should have been. I was on the phone early days in this pandemic with first responders, healthcare workers, trying to get more PPE for them, and we had states and localities and hospitals fighting amongst each other to try and get enough PPE. We had to have a better strategy going forward to do that. That's why I'm making sure this stuff gets made in America again.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Candidates, you do each have 30 seconds of rebuttal, however. Ms. Tenney, yours, please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to reiterate, the president did a very good job. We had a lot of issues in this state. My opponent refused to stand up to Governor Cuomo. I actually called for an investigation by the Medicaid Inspector General. We can't have Governor Cuomo's health inspector looking into this nursing home debacle. We need to do it on the federal level. Anthony Brindisi has been silent for several months. He has never stood up for our poor nursing home residents, many of them who were brought to an untimely death due to the absolutely outrageous policies of Governor Cuomo, who now has the audacity to write a book about this and to take credit for
Thank you,
the
Ms.
deaths
Tenney.
that have
Now, Mr. Brindisi, your 30 seconds of rebuttal. Please.
Again, it's sad that my opponent chooses to politicize a situation like what's happened in our nursing homes. What's happened in our nursing homes is appalling across the country, and I've been on the phone with families who have lost loved ones in nursing homes. The fact is that we didn't get enough PPE to people in nursing homes. We had to have a better strategy. I have actually voted for funding to go to to go to states to provide for strike teams to get into nursing homes early on. My opponent, when she was a member of the Assembly, she voted against staffing ratios to make sure we had enough healthcare workers in nursing homes and hospitals. That's not the
Thank
kind
you,
of
Mr.
leadership we need.
Brindisi. Thank you both candidates for your responses to round 2 of questioning. We will continue the 22nd District Congressional Debate in just a moment.
Live from Mohawk Valley Community College, this is the 22nd Congressional District Debate on your local election headquarters.
Round 3 of questioning beginning now. Candidates, Mr. Brindisi, you will be the first one to offer a response to this question from Thomas Fleming.
Mr. Brindisi, family farms have been pummeled with factors outside of their control for the past year, on top of dealing with farm stress. A January study by the CDC found that farmers are the most likely to die by suicide in comparison to any other vocation. And as of last month, the Farm Aid Crisis Hotline has seen a 27% increase in calls in 2020. Is family farmers' mental health an issue that should be addressed by the federal government? And if so, how would you address it?
Absolutely. In fact, the CDC reports that the suicide rate in rural communities is 45% higher than it is in urban areas. One of the reasons I wanted to serve on the Agriculture Committee is so I could actually be a voice for upstate farmers down in Washington. And I've been working on legislation with Congressman Katko, my Republican colleague from Syracuse, as well as Senators Grassley and Tester in the Senate, a rural mental health bill which would provide training for USDA workers and be able to provide for a public awareness campaign to help break down the stigma around mental health. I had a roundtable here back in the district with farmers and heard some stories that should all give us pause. We have to address mental health concerns in rural areas. Right now, farmers are undergoing a very difficult time because of the economics surrounding COVID, because of other issues, lack of health care in rural areas. So we have to address this at the federal level. I'm working on legislation which has actually passed both houses already as part of the defense authorization, and hopefully will get signed into law.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Ms. Tenney, your 1-minute response, please.
Yeah, thank you. This is a tragedy of epic proportions that the tradition of the family farm is being jeopardized in New York State, one of the top milk producers. I have family members who are both in dairy and in beef cattle who now are not able to do those operations because of the ridiculously burdensome costs that have been placed on them from the terrible votes coming out of Albany, which my opponent has voted for in his record before he got into Congress. And let's look at a guy that's actually on the Ag Committee who says he's working on all these bills. Again, what has he gotten passed? I voted with to vote for the UMCA, which helped our farmers. It helped a little bit with some of the tariffs that were coming in and brought some money to our farmers. But one of the big things that happened this year in the CARES Act, which was particularly bad, is that Nancy Pelosi's version of the bill actually cut $50 billion from the Senate version. And Anthony voted for that version, so our farmers were hurt. It proposed 50 and cut $28 billion. But guess who came in to the rescue? President Trump, using his Chinese tariffs, added $28 billion to rescue the farmers.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. And now, candidates, you each do have 30 seconds of rebuttal. Mr. Brindisi, let's begin with yours.
Again, what she said is false. I did not vote against funding going to agriculture. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I've actually fought for more funding going to ag, both in the CARES Act and subsequent legislation. In fact, when the economic injury disaster loans through the SBA were not being made available to farmers, I worked with a bipartisan coalition of members, and we fought to change those rules so farmers could get access to economic injury disaster loans. I still haven't heard what her plan is for rural mental health. We're actually doing something about that in the House.
Thank you, Mr.
Passed
Brindisi.
legislation.
Ms. Tenney, your 30 seconds.
My plan for rural mental health is giving farmers a chance to get back on track and run their businesses, and they'll care for themselves when they have an opportunity, but now government is in the way. The state government has hurt them and devastated them. The federal government has devastated them. So when you listen to Mr. Brindisi's talk and plans, you hear, I fought, I proposed. He didn't vote for or get anything for them. I actually voted and passed bills that helped our farmers. And yes, he did take $28 billion away from our ag committee, our farmers and our ranchers, and our crop farmers. He did do that in the CARES Act that he voted for.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. You will, however, offer the first response to our next question from Jim Emke.
Ms. Tenney, devastating floods have struck multiple areas of the district over the past decade. What should the federal government do to aid in flood mitigation? What should be done with the National Flood Insurance Program? And what role does climate change play in these natural disasters?
That's a hard question to answer in a short period of time. I'm trying to slow it down. But first of all, I served on the House Financial Services Committee, which actually, this is the committee of jurisdiction. One of the main reasons that I chose this committee, you'll hear it's all because I'm a stooge to corporations and big banks. You know me, that's not true, that's ridiculous. I'm a small business owner. But one of the things we can do, and I brought tremendous resources back using FEMA, we had to get the National Flood Insurance Program passed. It was a struggle to get it through. We'd like to have more options for people that are struggling with flooding. I know it's a big fight down in Washington when I have to say I come from a landlocked area to say that we have flooding, but infrastructure has been one of the biggest problems. And another huge problem has been an issue with DEC, which has made it very difficult for our local governments to actually manage the floods and the problems that we're having. We tried to bring some infrastructure. I brought tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure for water and for numerous groups around in the communities when I was serving in Congress. I want to do that again. I want to get back and make sure that we provide permanent infrastructure to bring us back.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Mr. Brindisi, your 1-minute response, please.
Well, these torrential storms have been the manifestation of climate change in our district, and I've toured many areas, whether it's up on the shores of Lake Ontario, here in the Utica area, in Whitesboro, New Hartford, or down in the southern tier. Our area is no stranger to flooding, and we have to do more to build back our infrastructure, but we also have to recognize that climate change is a threat to our planet, and if we don't do something about it now, then it's going to be too late. I have proposed investments in infrastructure. We've actually passed a bill in the House, again, sitting on the doorstep of Mitch McConnell in the Senate, another bill that they won't take up, that will actually help provide more support for resiliency programs, more investment in our energy grid so we can bring on more forms of clean energy to help lower carbon emissions. This is an issue that I take very seriously. My wife, who is a biology professor, and I and our 2 young kids talk about this on a regular basis. We can't deny climate change is real. We can't bury our heads in the sand, and we have to do something about it now before it becomes too late.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Ms. Tenney, you have 30 seconds of rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of this flooding you can attribute to climate change, although our climate does change, and I think we do need to address it. My biggest concern, again, is coming from the state government. I've dealt with this issue. I've climbed in and out of cellars all up and down my district when I was in the Assembly and also in Congress to deal with this devastating flooding, and have gotten resources to people. We worked around the clock to make sure that happened. But the problem, again, is DEC. We cannot manage our streams and lakes. DEC has prioritized the fish and wildlife over the human environment, something that's a direct violation of Regulation 15. That's something we're going to fight.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. Mr. Brindisi, you have 30 seconds of rebuttal also.
Well, my opponent can deny all she wants. The facts are the facts, and if you look at the amount of rainfall that's been going into the Great Lakes Basin over the last 10 years, it's gone up significantly, which has caused more flooding along the shores of Lake Ontario, devastating businesses and homeowners there. We have to do something about it. What we don't want to do is send my opponent back to Congress, who took $150,000 from oil companies and then voted to gut clean air, clean water protections. We don't want that kind of representation back in Washington, and we don't want someone who used her role on the Financial Services Committee to help Wall Street banks.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi, and we will remain with you for the first response to this question from Dan Cummings.
Mr. Brindisi, last winter, it seems like a long time ago now, but last winter you voted to impeach President Trump. You concluded that the evidence showed he abused the power of his office and that he obstructed Congress. A lot of voters have already cast their ballots in this congressional district between you and Ms. Tenney. A lot are yet to vote. And many of these voters may very well use this congressional election in the 22nd district as a referendum on President Trump. Should they?
Well, I think every voter has to make up their own decision as to how they're going to vote. And I will say that whether it is a Biden administration or another Trump administration, I will work with that administration to get things done, as I have with the Trump administration in my first 2 years in Congress. It's not easy to get 6 bills signed into law by this president in divided government, and I've been able to do that on very important issues like fighting the veteran suicide crisis and expanding mental health care to our veterans. By finally getting the Spoons Act passed to make sure that our military is buying flatware in this country, which benefits a manufacturer here in this district. By also getting another law signed to repeal health insurance taxes that were set to go into effect on employer-sponsored plans and seniors on Medicare Advantage plans. So despite all the noise in Washington, despite all the bickering, I've been able to work with members on both sides of the aisle to actually get things done. And during the height of this coronavirus, as our country is going through this global pandemic, we need people that can bring us together.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Ms. Tenney, your 1-minute response, please.
Yes, the question was on impeachment. You saw him meandering all over the place on impeachment. You know, Democrats tend to project what they've done already on us, and we can see that, what's happening with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and the issue dealing with Ukraine and China and all that those questionable issues. But on impeachment, let me tell you how lucrative this was for Anthony Brindisi. He hemmed and hawed about it. It showed that it was a partisan event. So when he talks about bipartisan and he's a guy that works with everybody, he voted on a very partisan line to impeach the President of the United States. And he was rewarded by Nancy Pelosi. He got the House Armed Services Committee right after that, which he had wanted before, but didn't get it because he had voted for Joe Biden for Speaker of the House. Imagine that. He also raised almost $1 million just for his impeachment vote from George Soros and far-left liberals from all across California and Chicago and New York City. And then, yes, he did get the Spoons Act passed, which, thanks to my staff, support procurement of our nation's stainless steel, wonderful company. And Cheryl, I'm proud to say that.
Mr. Brindisi, any rebuttal, 30 seconds worth up to?
Sure. And we're seeing exactly why voters in this district fired Ms. Tenney from this job, and now she wants to be rehired. The fact is, we got the Spoons Act passed because we made it bipartisan. When she tried to insert this bill into the defense authorization, it was a Republican-only bill. We actually went out and found a Republican to co-sponsor it with me, and I got it done. You want to talk about money? $600,000 from Wall Street banks, $150,000 from pharmaceutical companies, hundreds of thousands from big oil companies, health insurance, $170,000 to gut protections for people with pre-existing conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Ms. Tenney, your 30 seconds rebuttal, please.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to the guy who has run the most expensive campaign in the history of our region. Almost $30 million has been spent by Nancy Pelosi's super PAC. $30,000 from Adam Schiff, who ran the phony impeachment. That's part of the reason he voted to impeach. So when you hear about all this money and he talks about all these banks, how the heck do you raise $28 million or $29 million? More has been spent on his behalf than anyone in our nation's, or probably our region's history. And against me, to this date, an independent Marine mom, I've had $45 million spent against.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney. I apologize, candidates, but thank you for bearing with us through a third round of questioning. We will continue your 22nd District Congressional Debate in just a moment.
Live from Mohawk Valley Community College, this is the 22nd Congressional District Debate on your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to the New York 22nd District Congressional Debate from MVCC. We have time left, though, for 2-minute closing statements from each of the candidates. We're going to begin with Ms. Tenney. Your 2-minute closing statement, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike, and to our hosts, and also to our great panel, and also to my opponent. I just want to set the record straight and let our viewers know I am a single mom who raised my son, who ended up graduating from the U.S. Naval Academy and is now serving our country as a Marine captain. I'm a military family. We care deeply about this community, and that's why I actually live right up the street. But you're going to hear an awful lot of things out of Mr. Brindisi, probably even in his closing statement, about things that I stood for. But I was stood for as an independent person. I went to Washington. I brought record resources to this community. I fought hard for our veterans. I fought hard for people who were struggling with their health care. I'm the person that actually co-sponsored and passed the bill in the House of Representatives that guaranteed that people with pre-existing conditions would be covered. My opponent's not going to tell you that because his only proposal was a complete government takeover of our health care that would rip health care from 153 million Americans across the nation. Medicare for all is going to hurt our seniors. It's going to undermine their ability to earn something, to get what they earned their entire lives. Also, my opponent is going to tell you that he put out these bills against defunding the police. I'm going to back the police. You heard in this debate how many of them, how many police agencies across this community and across the state are endorsing me. It's because they know I back the blue. And when you talk about him being a moderate and someone who says that, you know, he's going to be bipartisan, think about this. You don't vote with Nancy Pelosi 90% of the time and call yourself bipartisan and call yourself moderate. That is a far-left agenda that the Democrats are thrusting on us. And one thing I will say is I'm going to also protect the life of the unborn. My opponent has voted 4 times and co-sponsored the bill in the State Assembly and supports it in Congress that would allow an abortion up to the moment of birth. Late-term abortion, he supports and he funds. That's not a moderate position either. I'm going to stand up for all of the needy people in our communities, which is why I'm the only one in this race who's won 2 national awards.
Thank you, Ms. Tenney, for your closing statement. I do appreciate it. Mr. Brindisi, your closing statement, please.
Well, thank you to our moderators and my opponent for being here. As Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. We are very divided in our nation right now, and what we need more in Washington are people who can bring us together. We're all Americans first. Before Democrats, before Republicans, we're all Americans, and we have to behave that way. In the last 2 years, since you have honored me to be your representative, I've gone to Washington. I have fought for the people of this district. I've stood up to powerful special interest groups, and I've actually delivered results, getting 6 bills signed into law by President Trump, supporting our veterans, supporting American manufacturing, and repealing health insurance taxes. I'm just getting started. If you send me back, I can even accomplish more on behalf of the people of this district. This district fired Ms. Tenney 2 years ago because she didn't show up. She didn't hold town hall meetings. She didn't listen to the constituents back home. She spent more time listening to the special interest groups and doesn't want to talk about her record while she's running a campaign of name-calling and finger-pointing is because she doesn't want you to know her record on health care, voting to gut protections for people with pre-existing conditions. That would devastate 1 in 2 people in this district who have pre-existing conditions like asthma or diabetes or cancer. She voted for a bill to give Spectrum $9 billion in a tax cut, $50 billion to the pharmaceutical industry, raising our debt by $2 trillion. That's going to undermine Social Security and Medicare. We have several thousands older Americans in this district who rely on Medicare and Social Security. She voted to undermine it. We need people who fight on behalf of this district, who fight on behalf of upstate New York. That's something I have always done in my career and will continue to do if you will honor me with another 2 years as your representative. Let's go to Washington and let's get things done. We have too many problems in this country to send extreme partisans back to Washington. We need problem solvers, and that's what I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brindisi. Candidates, thank you both very much for allowing all of us to hear from both of you in some pretty good amount of detail this evening. It certainly is not an easy thing to have to field rapid-fire questions from 3 television journalists, such as you've both done for the last hour. I greatly appreciate it from both of you. I also wish to thank Dr. Van Wagner and everyone in the administration and staff here at Mohawk Valley Community College. We're very grateful to be able to partner with you once again to having allowed us the use of the Schaefer Theater this evening. Of course, a studio audience in the theater might have been preferable, but under the circumstances, we had to know that that wasn't likely to happen. We're nonetheless very thrilled to be able to come into the theater and provide you with a debate evening. Thank you both for modeling this. Also, make sure to, get out and vote. No doubt many of you watching and listening to this already have. If you have, thank you. I'm glad that you took the time out of your busy lives in order to make your political voices heard. And hey, it's difficult to do so with Election Day being on a Tuesday, but if you don't have your ballot already cast, please, I'm begging you right now, whatever your political affiliation is, please take the time to do it, because really that's the only way in a Republican democracy that this voice is heard. Thank you very much, and good night.